What if the thing you fear most is only asking to be seen? What if darkness isn't where the monsters live, but where the misunderstood waits for light? Every night before sleep, Oliver stares at the same corner of his room, and every night he sees it again. A still, silent shape, hovering in the shadows. It doesn't move. It doesn't speak. But somehow the silence makes it louder. He never looks at it directly, only from the side. The same way we glance at something we don't want to name. Or the same way a child listens for a sound in the dark, but hopes it never comes. He pulls the blanket tighter over his head. He tries to pretend. He tries to breathe. But the more he ignores it, the more it grows. Not on the wall, but in his chest. And slowly, fear becomes part of the room. At first, Oliver thought he was just imagining things. It's just a shadow. It's just a corner. But then the thoughts started forming shapes. What if it moved? What if it's waiting? What if it only comes alive when I blink? His imagination painted stories, not with brushes but with tension. Stories that whispered themselves louder each night. And then he stopped playing on that side of the room. Books and toys piled up far from the shadow. He changed how he slept, lying still, facing the wall, pretending he couldn't feel it watching. He didn't tell anyone, not because he wasn't scared, but because he was afraid no one would believe it mattered. One day, while drawing in his sketchbook, he noticed something strange. A dark figure, shaded into the corner of the page, just like the corner of his room. The fear had followed him into daylight, into paper, into his hands. That night it became too much. When the lights went out, and the silence grew thick again, Oliver finally called out for his dad. A soft shuffle down the hall. The door creaked open. His father entered, sleepy and gentle. He sat by Oliver's side, reached over and turned on the lamp. With a soft, knowing tone, he invited Oliver to tell him what was wrong. Oliver pointed toward the corner, his hand trembling. "There's something in the corner, Dad, and I'm terrified. I'm sorry for waking you up." His father looked at the corner, then looked back at Oliver with warmth, without a trace of ridicule. He placed a gentle hand on Oliver's shoulder and said, "You don't need to worry, son. It's normal to feel afraid sometimes." He offered a soft smile, the kind that says, "I'm here and we'll face this together. Come on, let's check it out." Oliver hesitated, squeezing his father's hand. But then he nodded. They stood together and stepped closer. In the corner, the shadow remained, tall, unmoving, its shape stretched by the dim light. It looked strange and unfamiliar. His father leaned down slightly. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Oliver swallowed, took a breath, and flipped the switch. Light filled the room, washing away the shadows. In the corner stood an old coat rack, simple and tall, with a hoodie draped over its wooden arms. One sleeve hung lower, giving it a shape far more ominous in the dark than it deserved. The lamp's angle had stretched its shadow along the wall, twisting it into something unfamiliar. But that was all it had ever been. Not a monster, not a ghost, not some dark figure lurking in the night. Just a coat rack holding a hoodie. Oliver blinked in surprise. And then a soft, breathy laugh escaped his lips, as if releasing a tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. Beside him, his father smiled, resting a gentle hand on Oliver's back. And in a quiet voice, he said something simple and true. "Most of the things we fear only need a little light." That night, Oliver fell asleep easily. The shadow was gone, not because it had vanished on its own, but because he had seen it for what it truly was. He had faced it. He had understood it. Now he knew exactly what stood in that corner, and more importantly, what didn't. He didn't need to be fearless. He just needed to be willing to look. The fear itself had never been the real problem. It was the silence, the avoidance, the stories his mind had built in the dark. But once the light came on, those stories lost their shape. In their place there was peace. Not forced, not perfect, but honest, because the truth had never been something to fear. It was just a coat rack, holding a hoodie. Maybe you have a shadow too. Not in your room, but in your mind, in the corner of your thoughts, in the silence after the noise fades. Something you've avoided looking at, not because it's truly dangerous, but because it feels unknown. Sometimes we don't fear the thing itself. We fear what we've imagined it to be. We fill the dark with stories. We build outlines in our mind. And the longer we avoid looking, the more power that shadow seems to hold. But here's something quiet and true. Fear doesn't always need to be fought. Sometimes it just wants to be understood. And understanding begins with light. Not violence, not pressure, but presence. A moment of honesty, a hand to hold, a breath that says, I'm willing to see what's really there. And often when we do, we find not a monster, but something ordinary, something harmless, something waiting to be named. But still, some fears run deeper, some shadows stretch longer, and sometimes just turning on the light by yourself feels like too much. And that's okay. There is no weakness in needing help, no shame in asking someone to walk beside you, a friend, a loved one, or even someone ready to help you untangle what feels too heavy to carry alone. Because some fears don't fade by themselves. They need to be seen. They need to be met. With presence, with care, with the right company. So if something has been haunting you, quietly growing in the corners of your thoughts, and you don't feel ready to face it alone, that's not a failure. Reach out. Let someone turn on the light with you. Because fear loses its shape in good company. And one day, like Oliver, you may look back and realize, the shadow that once felt overwhelming was never what you imagined. It was just a coat rack, holding a hoodie. Now, sometimes you're not the one afraid of the shadow. Sometimes you're the one holding the light, the friend, the parent, the steady presence someone trusts, enough to say, I'm here. We'll face this together. Come on, let's check it out. In moments like these, your role isn't to fix, or to rush, or to explain away the dark. It's simply to stay, to offer your hand, to stand beside the person as they take their first hesitant look. And when that happens, remember this: what feels small to you might feel enormous to them. That's why we don't judge the shape of someone else's shadow. We don't dismiss the fears that live in corners we've never had to face. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't to say it's nothing, but to say, I see it too, and I'm here. Let's face it together, because in the end, fear isn't dissolved by certainty. It's dissolved by presence and light. I hope you liked this story, and if it brought a little light to something inside you, or reminded you of a shadow you've been meaning to face, consider sharing it with someone who might be standing near their own, someone who's waiting for a quiet hand to help them turn on the light. If you believe in stories that help us see, gently, clearly, and together, I invite you to like this video, subscribe, and help this story find its way to someone who needs it. And above all, I wish you a blessed life, brave enough to look, humble enough to ask, and kind enough to be the one who stays when someone else gathers their courage to ask. Will you come with me?